My name is Jordan Budd, Executive Director of COLAGE, the only national organization that explicitly supports people with LGBTQ parents, including those born via donor conception. It's good to be with all of you tonight. First and foremost, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on a historical night in the wake of President Biden's signature of the Respect for Marriage Act. While we have much more to do to secure the legal rights of LGBTQ families, we're thrilled that our families will be protected no matter what happens at the Supreme Court. Now, on to the subject at hand. Throughout the year, we've been hearing many different stories about donor conception in the news and popular media. While COLAGE celebrates that donor-conceived voices are finally being heard, we found that the voices of donor-conceived collagers, people with LGBTQ parents or caregivers, were being left out of the national conversation. Tonight, we'll be highlighting just a few stories from donor-conceived people with LGBTQ parents. We're also going to hear from our friends at the Sperm Bank of California and GLAD, GLBTQ advocates and defenders, who will discuss the history, research, and legislative landscape for LGBTQ families formed through donor conception. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. First, Seth Joels is from Burlington, Vermont, and currently lives and works in New York City as a social media manager while attending the New School, seeking his master's in communication and media studies. Seth has had a wide breadth of experience working for national retail and food beverage franchises, a top drink university, volunteering with civil rights and voter registration organizations, a social justice consultant agency, a nonprofit arts organization, and as a freelance photographer, videographer, and designer. Seth Joels is an avid performer and received his BA in musical theater from Wagner College. Seth is thrilled to be joining this panel and sharing his experience as a donor-conceived collager. Next up is Melina Simard-Holm. The daughter of two gay dads, Melina Simard-Holm has been involved with collage programming for her whole life. As a camper, staff member, and now board member, Melina was born through assisted reproduction. Melina is from Santa Fe, New Mexico, but she is currently in her last year of law school at Yale Law. There she has worked on advocacy efforts related to parentage laws and other civil rights. She will be moving to San Francisco to clerk next year and hopes to work as a public interest lawyer. Next up is Rai Russo-Young. Rai is a bold and innovative director and writer whose work defies traditional limitations in filmmaking. Rai's early independent work has been associated with the mumblecore genre, though she has gone to direct the wide-release features Before I Fall and The Sun Is Also a Star, as well as television and commercial projects, including Apple's upcoming Shrinking, Sweet Bitter, and Marvel's Cloak and Dagger. Rai's latest project, Nuclear Family, is a 3-hour limited documentary series based on the true story of her sperm donor suing her lesbian mothers for visitation and paternity rights when Rai was 9 years old. The series aired in 2021 on HBO, receiving much critical acclaim with nominations for a Peabody Award, Independent Spirit Award, and GLAD Award. And you should definitely go watch it. Next is Alice Ruby, Executive Director at the Sperm Bank of California. Alice Ruby is the executive director of the Sperm Bank of California, the only nonprofit sperm bank in the US. The Sperm Bank of California has provided ethical family building services for the LGBTQ community, single parents, and heterosexual couples since 1982, and was the first sperm bank worldwide to provide an option for donor-conceived people to learn the identity of the donor. Alice has released donor identities to 200 plus donor-conceived adults, matched 1,200 plus families with others who share their sperm donor, and provides resources and support to Sperm Bank of California parents, donors, and donor-conceived adults. She is a research collaborator with Joanna Sheeb, PhD, TSBC's research director, and speaks at professional conferences and in community forums on program outcomes, ethical issues in sperm donation, and talking with children about their origins. Also, Alice is second-gen queerspawn. Finally, Polly Crozier is the Director of Family Advocacy at GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, or GLAD. Polly came to GLAD from private practice, where her work focused on LGBTQ probate and family law, including adoption, divorce, dissolution, guardianship, paternity, parentage, name changes, gender marker changes, and assisted reproduction issues. Polly has engaged in cutting-edge trial court and appellate litigation involving assisted reproduction and parentage. At GLAD, Polly's work focuses on youth and family issues, including parentage, protections, adoption, transgender family law, juvenile justice, and child welfare. Most recently, she has successfully worked to help pass statutory family law reforms in Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, and Connecticut. So I have just been talking for quite a bit. If you would like to hear my bio, you can go to the Collage website at collage.org and read it for yourself. So before I move on, I just want to welcome folks who might have joined while those introductions were going on. We're so happy that you're here, and we're really excited to be with you tonight and talk about LGBTQ families and specifically the experiences of donor conceived people in those families. So we're going to start the panel by talking with Seth. Seth, I'm going to turn it over to you and would love to hear more about your story.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jordan. Hello, everyone. Like Jordan said, my name is Seth Jollis. I'm from Burlington, Vermont. And my relationship with being third generation queer spawn starts before I was born and before the opportunity for me to be born was handed to my parents. My parents were one of the three couples to sue the state of Vermont in the Baker versus Vermont case in 1998 with the Beth Robinson, who now serves on the United States District Court, the 13th Circuit, I believe. I was born into the turmoil of that court case, and my experiences are inexplicably linked with that and the struggles my parents faced in bringing me here today. I have two wonderful parents, one who identifies with she, her pronouns, and one that identifies with any pronouns. So I don't like to put a label on the way that my parents identify, but they are wonderful parents. My experience of coming here today and being a donor conceived person started with my brother. My parents had one more child before they had me, and he was conceived using a sperm bank, an anonymous sperm bank out of, I believe they were living in Asheville, North Carolina at the time. My wonderful brother, Noah, was born in 1992, and he was born with a heart condition. This heart condition was life-threatening, and he did not have the opportunity in his very short lifespan to receive a heart transplant and live. It was then understood, once he had unfortunately passed away, that the heart condition that he had received at birth was inherited by his sperm donor, and that several of the other people who he had provided opportunities for donor conception also experienced that same heart condition. Many of them received transplants in time and have gone on to tell that story. I'm here today because of a very different experience with donor conception. When my parents moved to Burlington, Vermont, they decided, though they believed very firmly in sperm banks, that they wanted to know the person who they were going to move forward with donor conception. So the options were they would look at a sperm bank with ID laws, and Vermont did not have those at the time, or find someone they knew who was willing to make me possible. So they had a close friend in the neighborhood. His name was Mark. He's a wonderful guy. And after some conversation, and my brother had recently passed away, and my parents had continually talked about wanting to have another child, Mark agreed to be my donor. Mark is a fantastic guy. He has 3 daughters. I know him very well, but my relationship with him is not and has never been one of paternal value. And for that, I'm very grateful. It was the agreement that him and my parents had, that he wanted nothing to do with me as a child. He'd already raised 3 girls, but he was happy to help make me possible. I am incredibly grateful to him. If it were not for his generosity and for his understanding as a straight ally to my parents, I would not be here today. I am wonderfully lucky to grow up in a state like Vermont, where things like that are possible, and your neighbors and the people around you are willing to support you in raising a child and provide you with that opportunity. Just this last summer, we had dinner with his daughters and Mark, And my relationship with him is not something that is on the forefront of my life experience. It hasn't driven me as a person. He did not raise me, but I am incredibly grateful for what he allowed. And I think that without the opportunities that someone like Mark, or someone who goes to their local sperm bank, and someone who puts themselves, puts their ability to provide to the world and the people who need them in the world, is incredibly valuable. So I'm grateful to him and everyone who allows this opportunity to happen. So that's kind of my experience.
Really appreciate you sharing all of that, Seth, and also completely apologize for butchering the pronunciation of your last name. I had no idea. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
Well, thank you again for sharing. I have a few questions for you that we'll get to for most of our panelists. How and when did you learn that you were donor conceived?
That's such a great question. And I called my parents this afternoon because I wanted to make sure I had all the information about my brother correct, and I wanted to make sure these things that I didn't know necessarily because I wasn't there. But I've kind of always known. I remember being maybe 3 or 4 years old, and there's this story that my parents insist on telling at every large gathering, and it is inappropriate for family gatherings. But it is the story that they had been trying for several months to have me, and Mark continually was the one allowing me to come to existence, and he was providing that. And every time one of my parents, who I call my pop, who I'll refer to as my pop, would walk down the street, 5 houses down, with a turkey baster, and walk back with a turkey baster that was more full than it was when they had first gone to the house. And this story is told, and we live in Vermont, so it's like -15 degrees. So she's running in between these houses so the situation doesn't get too cold. And this story is told, and I distinctly remember it maybe 3, maybe 4 years old. So I've always known. I think it was something they wanted me to know, so they understood my relationship to Mark. And they wanted me to understand that he had no interest in being a parental figure, but that they knew where I came from, and so that I could answer questions that were eventually asked by my peers.
Would you mind sharing what some of those questions were? That's actually one of the questions I was planning to ask you, is what has the reaction been from other people when you've shared about being donor conceived?
Totally. I think that for the most part, when people hear that I have, 2 moms presenting, and that's the understanding that there is a donor in the picture. And for the most part, the assumption is that I came from a sperm bank. That is the assumption, that the individual who provided that for my family came from a sperm bank. And the most interesting, and it's kind of fun, is to tell them that I know the guy and he lives down the street. And it confuses people. They really get confused, and I find a little bit of joy in it because it's a little funny. Because I love to break down those norms and explain something new to people, because that is not a concept that's understood. That's even something that people would do. That's something people can do. So I really love having opportunities on the daily to educate people about something they may or may not know. I grew up in Vermont, and I went to school here in New York, and I have most of my family in Los Angeles, and these are places that understand these concepts for the most part, places where people are accepting and understanding of donor conception, of the opportunities that allowed me to be here today. But this idea that I might know that person and they are not my father is really shocking to people, because then it's like, so you do have a father. Because that's like the inevitable question in the picture is, so there is a guy, and then he raised you, and he's the male figure in your life. And I'm like, no, he has nothing to do with my parentage. So those are like the main questions I get.
So one final question, what, if anything, would you like for people to know who might be listening to this about what it's like being donor conceived from your perspective?
Totally. I would love for there to be a more open dialogue about that, and I think that primarily I'd like people to be more understanding of the scope of where people can come from and how they can be brought to this world. It's super binary, it's super linear, and people have really maybe 2 or 3 ideas. And that's amazing that we came from one idea maybe 20 years ago. But these maybe 2 or 3 ideas are really restricting in our understandings of where people can come from. And it really reduces our ability to empathize and understand those around us and better support each other. So I think it's about the people who are here today. You're making that first step. You're educating yourself about donor conception. You're educating yourself about the variety of ways that people can enter the world. And I think that is, you've made a phenomenal first step. And I think you should continue your education.
Thank you so much for sharing, Seth. We'll come back to you in the general Q&A, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Melina, we're going to move on to you. I hope you're doing well. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story and what else you'd like to share with us tonight.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. It's good to see you. And thank you, Seth, for that amazing story and for sharing. And also thank you all for being here and listening to us. My name is Melina Simard-Halm, and I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico, but I'm currently a law student at Yale in New Haven. I'm a very proud daughter of 2 wonderful fathers, and I'm also the older sister of 2 brothers. All 3 of us were born through assisted reproduction. I was born in 1996, and I was born through in vitro fertilization, so with the help of an egg donor, a surrogate, and the sperm from one of my fathers. My egg donor was non-anonymous. I am, as Seth said, entirely grateful for all of the people, the huge team of people who made my life possible. In 1996, things were very different. And my dad's actually tried for over 10 years to have me. It took them that long. And they were so committed to having a child that they defied so much, not only hatred from people, but from the legal system as well. And that's always so deeply inspiring for me to think about in this context, just as a background fact. People often ask me what my experience was like growing up with an LGBTQ family and also a donor conceived one. And, it's an interesting question to me because at once my identity and my family's identity made my childhood different in meaningful ways. But it was also very much the same in the ways that mattered the most. I feel, again, like the luckiest person in the world to have 2 parents that have loved me so much as my dads have. And I know I said they fought so hard to have me. I'm the result of a lot of love and care and generosity from so many people, and at a time when they were facing a lot of hatred. And that's one of the most deeply powerful feelings, but also it goes to show that I was also born in the context of a lot of homophobia, and that, of course, has affected my upbringing as well. My dads were told that they weren't fit to be parents, and still I think that notion still exists for some people, the idea that some people are not fit to be parents. And I think my dad's proved them all wrong. My parents are my dads in every sense. It didn't matter that I was donor conceived or that they were gay. They loved me and cared for me every day of my life. And I've never once felt that I was missing anything. Quite the opposite. I feel so fortunate. But again, as I said, because of my family background, we did experience a lot of bigotry growing up. I did when I was young, as a result of the fact that they were gay, but also because I was donor conceived. Homophobia was widespread, whether it was on the playground or in the news, and I often felt afraid. I think queer spawn are unique because they experience homophobia from the moment they're born, really. And young people are very perceptive. People don't realize what it's like to have your existence be a topic of public debate. And that was hard growing up. And there were also laws that send clear messages that our family was one that was different, stigmatized, and wasn't the same as everyone else's. And flaws like that continue to exist today. I'm 26, and while things have changed, there are some things that haven't. And, Polly and Jordan and other people on the call have worked really hard to ensure that the laws that we have ensure inclusive spaces for families. People would often ask, who is your real dad? And that line of questioning was really baffling to me when I was young. I mean, it was, now I understand where they're coming from, but at the time when I was young, the thought that one of my parents was any less of a parent was really unfathomable. Both of my dads dedicated their lives to me, and they sacrificed so much. I mean, it makes me weep to think about how much they did. And they equally loved me and comforted me and raised me. They both were reading to me at night and tying my shoelaces. And so my life has been short, but it's been a beautiful one because of them for the most part. And so I stand to be very grateful for my family, for all that it is, and a rare and unique, but really beautiful one. And, I really look forward to answering any of your questions about it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Melina. My first question is actually kind of unrelated to the subject matter. Did any of what you experienced growing up lead you to law school? Is that why you're there right now?
Of course it did. I'm sure. I'm just following in the footsteps of other incredible lawyers that have really paved the way, like Polly. But I think that I saw the law when I was growing up as a tool that could cut or could be used in a liberating way. I was born in a world where, gay sex was actually criminalized in some places still, where gay marriage was going back and forth. I mean, Prop 8 would come down, and then, the law was never a friend to me, it felt like, when I was growing up. But I saw people like Polly, like my dad, who were using law as a tool for emancipation and for change. And in that vein, that's why I wanted to go to law school, because I saw it as not just a tool of bad, but as something that we could do good with, and help families like mine, but also more people that have, been subject to oppression because of the law. So,
yeah. Well, first, talking about your family, if you could go back in time and advise your parents, what would you tell them?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I needed to tell them this, but I think, like, never second guessing themselves or feeling nervous to talk to me about subjects that were difficult. They were always really open and transparent with me. And I always really appreciated that. I think that, this is really more coming from my end. I was nervous to tell them when I was experiencing bullying because of who I was. And that was really me, because I didn't want to, the thought of them having to hear that was so hurtful to me too. I didn't want them to have to deal with that. But I guess creating an environment where you can always talk about these things and recognize the world as it is and reflect on that is something that I appreciated that they did in a lot of circumstances. And I think that the fact that they were so proud of who they were, even when I felt scared about, my family and our identity, especially when we moved, was so meaningful to me. Their bravery gave me bravery, and it continues to do that. And so it's not so much as something that could be changed, but something that I really appreciated that they did. Because there are going to be hard questions in a world where people ask hard questions or do kind of cruel things, and our families are never insulated from those types of questions. And so having a space to be able to do that was important.
When did your dads tell you that you were donor conceived, or how did that process happen, as it so often is in queer families, a process, not really a one conversation?
Well, you have to at some point realize that something, there was an additional feature of your life that made it possible. I mean, I feel like I kind of had a better sense of biology before a lot of my other friends, because my dad's really taught me kind of the mechanics of how this happened. And there's not a single time again that I can remember. It was, again, a process that as your mind becomes more sophisticated to understand what's actually necessary for a child to be born, you're able to more fully grasp what happened. But I always knew there was a team of people that allowed my parents to have me, and they never hid that fact from me. I didn't know like what a zygote was until later on, but eventually I also learned that. And I really appreciate that my parents were never secretive about it. But I also didn't matter to me for so long until the obvious biological question kind of came up for me in the probably around 7 or 8 or something. I don't know. It's hard to know.
So my final question for you, for now, you mentioned having a known egg donor. How has that been in terms of a relationship for you over the course of your life? Is it similar to Seth's? Is it different? Curious to know what that is like.
Yeah, so it was a non-anonymous egg donor, but I didn't have any relationship with my egg donor basically for the entirety of my life until actually quite recently. I have met my egg donor through a coincidence, actually. But she's a lovely, lovely woman, and I'm so grateful for her help. It was very brave of her to help my dad's at that time. And she made my life possible, and her kindness is something I'll always be grateful for. That said, my relationship with her doesn't have like a mystical quality to it by any means, and I don't think she does feel that way towards me either. And it feels like an incredible woman that I have met, and I'm very grateful for. So,
thank you for sharing. Rye, we're gonna move along to you. Thank you so much for joining with us tonight. I read this in your bio earlier, but I just want to shout out to everyone listening that they should immediately, after this webinar, but immediately go watch Nuclear Family on HBO, rather than have you just recount what has been so well documented for us. I figured that I would just ask you a few questions, and you can maybe fill in some gaps, and then if anyone else has follow-ups, we'll make sure they get to you.
Okay, sounds good. Can I first just say one thing, which is that it's so interesting and always fascinating to hear other collagers speak, because I find there's just these common threads amongst us, and that our parents had to go through such great lengths to have us to begin with, that it's like you're already starting with this sort of overwhelming amount of love. And what Melina was just saying about transparency was certainly so true in my family, that there was like an openness from the beginning, because sort of from the beginning, it's like running around with turkey basters in the snow, and like the amount of kind of effort and love and us against the world that kind of comes into when you form a gay family at all in any kind of way. I think it does translate into the raising of us, and it's sort of a beautiful thing to have that kind of openness and care and love. So I always find other collagers so articulate and beautiful in that way. And it's cool to hear you guys speak. So thank you.
Definitely agreed. It's always nice to be in a room full of collagers and share these stories.
And I'm also so struck how there's so many stories of like us against the law. I mean, that's really harrowing. Just that we've all had these interactions with the law, that are, so glad you're working on that, Melina.
Well, since you opened the door, I feel like of all of us here, you probably had the most intimate experience with the law. I was wondering if you might expand on how you're feeling today as an adult about the experience of living through a paternity battle that involved your known donor.
Yeah, I'm gonna give people like a tiny recap because I'm not gonna assume that everyone's seen Nuclear Family at all, of course. So let's just I was born in 1981 via two lesbian mothers who used a known donor that I met when I was 3 years old. I have a sister, one mom had me, one mom had my sister, actually using different known donors via, syringe without a needle, and super DIY. There was like a pamphlet that they did it themselves. Again, I was born in 1981, and then I met my donor. I had a relationship with him as a family friend, not as a father. And then when I was 9, he sued for visitation and paternity of me. It was a very messy 4-year-long court battle. So the question was, how do I feel now about the lawsuit, or about everything, or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, about everything.
Good.
I feel like the tone of the documentary was very self-reflective, and I'm wondering really how that perspective has evolved as you've grown up and really had time to sit and think about your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think after making the documentary, the thing that I felt above all is that it's almost like is that I wasn't going to get some kind of full perfect closure. We sort of want everything to be like, oh, there's a bow at the end and you're like, you're done. Like, I imagined closing a book as if it was a chapter in my life that had shut. But it's sort of being okay with the mixed feelings, that I can hold all of these feelings for my donor and my biological father at the same time, and that those feelings can be as radical as hate, how dare you sue my family, affection for the relationship that was there, sadness for his death, proud of the film, love for my mothers and my sister and my family, like that. All of those things can coexist, and it doesn't have to be one thing. So, but I think more than anything, I do appreciate my family. I'm at my mother's house right now. For those who have seen the documentary, this is the room where we had the big chat in the third part. And I'm working a job. I'm directing a couple TV episodes here in New York, and so I normally live in LA, and so I came to New York to do this job, and I could have been put up in a hotel in Long Island City near the studio where we're shooting, but I wanted to stay with my moms, and so I'm in their little guest room here, and because I love them dearly, and it's like every moment is precious, especially as your parents get older, you're just like, I just want to be with you as much as I can.
Yeah. So about that, I would love to know what your relationship was like with your parents in those years that we didn't see in the documentary, after the legal battle died down, but before perhaps the clarity of adulthood.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me there was after the lawsuit, I went through such a period of being the lawsuit sort of forced my family to be very, and just the homophobia in the world was so intense that we sort of had to be spokespeople, right? We had to be like, my family is fine, kind of. We were very defensive because there was no room for ambiguity. And I think even after the lawsuit, that was still such a huge thing in my family, of like kind of this pressure to be, and it was a pressure that was from us to be perfect and to be kids, because it was literally like the kids of gay families are sick, like the gayness is still a sickness was the idea. So we were combating so much of that and having to be like, no, we're fine, we're normal, we're okay, and which now seems kind of insane. But so I think those years after that, at least for me, I had spent so much of my life kind of defending my family that it was nice to kind of go off and do my own thing and not make go make movies about and do make a bunch of art and work that had nothing to do with my family, because it was such a huge part of my life. And then that's sort of the irony, is that then like I came finally, after sort of having to like find myself apart from my mothers and all of that, then I kind of came back to it because it was always there and present with me, of course.
We'll go right over to Polly to follow that up.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It is fantastic to be here, and I will be brief. I know we're past 9 o'clock. I'm sure Jordan has a plan to get us out of here not too long. So I want to just give you a little bit of the landscape of policy and legislation around around regulation of gamete provision in the United States. And I think first, important to the context of what's happening with legislation and policy is something that people have talked a lot about tonight already, which is parentage equality work. That's what I like to call it. GLAAD and LGBTQ organizations like NCLR and COLAGE and Family Equality have been working to protect LGBTQ families and children for over 40 years. And I think we've been doing that work because families are core to our everyday lives and lack legal protections that create such obvious and profound harms, in particularly the separation of children from their parents. And LGBTQ families and their children continue to be vulnerable today because of outdated parentage laws that don't protect all children, including children born through assisted reproduction, children born through surrogacy, and children born to non-biological parents. There's really still a patchwork of protections across the country for LGBTQ families, and we're working incredibly hard to fill those gaps and to move states forward to make sure there's comprehensive equality for all children. We've had success, as Jordan noted, in a number of states: Washington State, California, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, and the work continues in many states. Marriage equality is, of course, so helpful, so important. We are thrilled that President Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act today, which secured marriage equality in federal law for LGBTQ and interracial couples. So incredibly important. And security for parent-child relationships is work that was happening before marriage equality and work that will happen despite marriage equality, because parentage, that legal relationship between a parent and a child, that is a relationship through which every protection, right, responsibility for a child flows. Public benefits, health insurance, decision-making, custody, parenting time. So that's a lot of the work that I do, is to try to secure those relationships. And, just a shout out, because we got this question from some of the participants, that for people who are married, you still need to take some affirmative action to secure your parent-child relationship. Really, the best practice is, no matter who you are, married or unmarried, is to get an adoption decree, an adjudication of parentage, or something that's equivalent to an adjudication of parentage, like a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, which are available in 11 states. Okay, so that's a broader legal context, right? So my point is, parentage law is incredibly important to this conversation, as we've heard from our panelists tonight. And then I'll move on to talk briefly about a little bit about the law and policy to regulate the provision of donor gametes, which is really kind of an emerging issue in the United States. The UPA, which is the Uniform Parentage Act of 2017, is a good place to start. So the Uniform Parentage Act of 2017, for you family law nerds out there, is a model act that is developed by experts that recommends to states. It's a recommended law that states should pass to protect children, so that every child, again, has access to that legal parent-child relationship. It was updated in 2017 after the marriage equality case of Obergefell versus Hodges, to make sure that state parentage law protects children of LGBTQ families. So now, and this is part of my work, we're trying to encourage states to adopt this updated law to protect all of those children. So the UPA of 2017 incorporates an Article 9, that is modeled after a Washington state law. And what Article 9 suggests that states do is to regulate gamete banks in that state in a number of ways. One, it is to say gamete banks must collect medical information and identity information from gamete donors. That banks should provide intended parents and people born through donor gametes with non-identifiable medical information that they have about the gamete provider, right? So the people should have access to medical information. And that banks should be asking gamete providers whether or not they want to be known to the people born from their gametes. And to the extent they say yes, to keep those records and to make sure that when those people turn 18, they can access that identity information. Article 9 doesn't require identity release, but it tries to say, banks, you need to have a system for this. And it tries to encourage the release of identity to people who are born through donor gametes at age 18. Article 9 of the Uniform Parentage Act has been enacted in a number of states, including Washington State, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And other states who are working on bills adapted from the Uniform Parentage Act of 2017 might very well have Article 9. We might see that in the upcoming legislative sessions this year or in future years. So that's kind of one policy issue that's happening. And then recently, as Alice noted, 2 states have kind of done some standalone bills about regulation of gamete providers. And the first of that is Colorado. So Colorado passed a bill in 2022, which was based loosely on Article 9 and included some additional provisions. It actually requires that donor gametes be identity release donors. So that means that when people who are turn 18, that people can see through donor gametes can access the identity information of their donor. The law also provides access to non-identifying medical information. It says gamete banks should, work in good faith to secure updated medical information at regular intervals. The law provides for written educational materials to be provided to intended parents and also to gamete providers on a number of topics, essentially kind of encouraging transparency with children who are born through donated gametes or embryos. It also provides that gamete providers must be at least 21 years old to donate gametes. And it has banks are supposed to work to limit the number of families created through one gamete provider. And that limit in Colorado is 25 families. That's just a brief overview of Colorado. Maybe Ivory can, or I can share the link to that bill to folks and to registrants. And then another state, California, passed a bill in September of 2022, which actually was vetoed by the governor, we think due to cost reasons. And that bill was an education bill. And it provided that gamete banks should provide written educational materials to both intended parents and to gamete providers, again, on various topics, and essentially encouraging transparency with children born through donated gametes or embryos. So that's what's kind of currently happening. And I think, obviously we're looking ahead to the horizon. What's going to happen in legislation and policy moving forward? And first, I just think that, having the stories and experiences of people born through donated gametes or embryos in LGBTQ families is so central to this conversation. I'm so grateful to our speakers tonight. I think it's an incredibly important step to elevate those voices and those perspectives to inform the work moving forward. LGBTQ organizations like COLAGE, like GLAD, and CLR, Family Equality, we're really working closely in collaboration. We'll be following any and all bills closely, and we'll engage in technical advice, drafting, advocacy to ensure that LGBTQ families and their children are protected and that their perspectives are represented in whatever bill is moving forward. And I would say if anybody hears a bill is moving forward in your state, please reach out. We're here to support, we're here to help. We have a lot of experience helping to draft statutes, and we really want to partner with you. And we will continue to engage in discussions and collaborations across stakeholder groups. Because I think that's one of the things I've learned in recent years and months working on this issue is that there's so many stakeholders that intersect with this issue, and that we need to work together to hear perspectives, to find common ground, and to avoid harm and unintended consequences. Some of those stakeholders at the table, LGBTQ groups, racial justice groups, disability rights groups, reproductive rights groups, we all need to be working together on these issues as these laws and policies develop. And I think kind of grapple with some of the key issues and questions, right? Which there are many, but some of those key issues and questions are, what are the most important issues in this area of law and policy, right? Is it transparency of medical information? Is it the ability to access identity information? Is it education for intended parents and gamete providers? And how do we address some of those issues with, again, avoiding harm, right? I think when parentage equality differs state by state, how do you make sure that any legislation doesn't undermine the security of families in a particular state, right? For example, if, a parent is anyway, don't need to give examples at 9 o'clock at night, but, and also how do you avoid reducing the supply of donor gametes? How do you avoid raising more barriers for LGBTQ families? We've already heard about how, what that struggle is like to build a family as an LGBTQ family. How do we not, promote more burdens and cost and whatnot? How do we make sure that we, are supporting the reproductive autonomy and the right to build a family of everybody? So anyway, those are just some of the key issues and questions we're grappling through. We're really happy to be part of this conversation and in partnership with COLAGE on these topics. And thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Polly. We so appreciate you being here and sharing some of the history as well as the legal landscape with all of us. And especially, Polly, I know you're under the weather tonight and just so grateful that you stuck with us. If folks could give us 17 more minutes perhaps of their time, we were going to ask just a few more wrap-up questions. And as soon as we get through those, we'll sign off for the night and let everyone go. So I'll just jump right in to save time. For the donor-conceived panelists, now that anti-queer rhetoric is again on the rise and queer adults who work with and care for children are often being vilified, I wonder if you have advice or wisdom to share with queer parents of donor-conceived kids. Were there ways that your parents talked about homophobia and discrimination that you found particularly effective and comforting as a child?
Yeah, I mean, my moms growing up were really defiant about who they were. They were unashamed, and they taught my sister and I to be unashamed and to not let other people define our family, and to sort of refuse to engage in their homophobia. And my sister and I had different perspectives on how we dealt with that in the world. But I think that that was helpful to be really clear within our family about who we are and say, that's a screwed up question. That's their own.
Thank you so much, Alice.
So much of the time, it's like the people that are asking you homophobic questions, that's because they can't figure out who you are. It has nothing to do, like, who you are, you know who your family is. It's their misunderstanding mishigas. And I think that kind of clarity of what goes on within the family and who we are versus the outside world was actually just gave us a sense of strength.
I'll just quickly add to that. I mean, Raya said it so beautifully, but I think taking courage was so important to me growing up, seeing my dads be so brave. It was as though nothing was going around in the world because they were so proud of who they were and of our family. And they, the love that our family had just spoke for itself, and they always stood by that. And, I think, Raya mentioned clarity, and I think, just taking that moral clarity that you're doing what you were meant to do, which is raise a family. You have loved your child, and that's something that no one can tell you can't do, and no one can tell you that you're not fit to be a parent. And so never second guessing yourself is so important. All of us here are testimony of this, that our families are valuable and wonderful. So that's what I'll say.
I think finally, the only thing I would tack on kind of is that I think maybe not all of us, but I'll just speak for myself at least. I grew up in a bubble where the questions I answered, though often, microaggressions of homophobia were not built behind systemic hatred of who I was and who my family was because of where I lived and the people that surrounded me. And though that is an incredible privilege that I was afforded, that is not a privilege that all donor-conceived people and all collagers are afforded. And I think that that's really important to acknowledge. And I don't have the answers to what parents of collagers should do in those scenarios when you live in a situation where you are seen as the Antichrist, or you are seen as an abomination to what a community holds as their collective values. But I can say that especially when I was very young and my parents were in the spotlight, Oh, I'm sorry. That was the buzzer in my apartment. My parents were in the spotlight. We spent a lot of time defending who we were and who our family was. And what it really came down to uh, was knowing that we loved each other and we cared about each other at a root central, that we were honest. Oh my goodness, they're still buzzing. That we were honest with each other, and that we knew that even if the world around us was crashing around us, and if they claimed that we were going to sprout horns and a tail, that we knew in reality that we were just as much a family as everyone around us. And that gave me at least the power to go out into the world. And as my other panelists here, my fellow panelists mentioned, approach the world with a kind of confidence and the kind of self-determination that allows you to be exactly who you want to be.
I will let you go answer that, Seth. Thank you so much for for that answer. Moving on, what, if any, policy changes would you like to see in the US with regard to donor conception and surrogacy for any panelist?
If no one else wants to go first, I'll go. There's a couple things that we think that the Colorado law really got right that we would like to see across the board. One is making it required for donors to release their identity to donor conceived adults when they turn 18. We think that the research indicates that that is beneficial for the families, and it's actually in the best interest of the donors in this age of DNA testing. We think that that is beneficial to everyone. We also think smaller numbers of families per donor is better. At the sperm bank, we've had a 10 family limit since we started, and I'm not aware of anyone else who has a limit that small currently in the US. I think that I wish the Colorado limit had gone a little farther. I believe it was 25, and we would like to see that lower. So we would like to see those particular regulations across the US. I will say, speaking as someone who works at a sperm bank, it's a little complicated, when if every state has different rules, it's going to be a little complicated for us just logistically to do our operations.
If no one else is jumping in, I'll echo a lot of what Alice just said. And COLAGE is in the process of forming some official papers and things like that on these issues. And we'll have more for folks in the new year. We're also working on our donor conception guide. We're revising it. The last time it was revised, we still called it the donor insemination guide. So we're growing up in that way and adding more perspectives from donor conceived queer spawn. And that should also be available in January.
Can I just add
ahead.
something really quick, Jordan? I think also, like, my story and the story that I've, in nuclear family is very much a cautionary tale of, knowing your donor and not having legal protections. At the same time, I'm so happy that I met my donor, and I feel like that was a really valuable experience and relationship in my life. And I feel personally like, it was worth it, even though it was totally screwed up, and that children should be entitled to know their biology. And so that speaks to, really what you guys are saying, is that should be available to them if they want it to be. But it's messy, it's complicated. At least now there's laws to protect parents.
So the final question that I'll pose, and then maybe we'll get out of here a few minutes early. For those of us who have children through an anonymous donor, do you have any advice about how to approach the identity of the donor? Our donor will allow our child to contact him once he turns 18. How do we approach questions in the meantime?
Well, since I actually give talks on that subject, maybe I'll take a stab, and I'd love anyone else's feedback as well. We think, follow your child's lead as you share your information proactively, and then see what questions your child has. We tend to find that as children get older, they have different questions as they understand different things. With regard to the identity of the donor, most people have some sort of packet about the donor or information. Another way to get information is through a registry. A lot of sperm banks have their own registries. There's also the donor sibling registry and other places online where you can connect with others who share the donor. If there's photographs, like, we don't think there's anything wrong with showing that information to your child as they grow up and explaining to them, this is the agreement. But make sure you know what the agreement is. Every sperm bank has a different program for what information they release, how they release information, whether it's a one-time phone call or actually releasing his name. It's all very different. So research it, find out what the policy is so that you can answer your child's questions directly and specifically.